Good evening, everybody. We're so happy to have everyone here that has joined us here for our first night of our digital family seminar. We're super excited to have with us tonight Sister Gabi Reyes, who is a licensed family and marriage therapist. She is going to be speaking to us for the next 3 days. She is highly sought after, an incredible speaker, and you are in for a treat. Every single one of you that are here, and those of you that are going to be watching later on as well, we are super excited to have Sister Gabi here, and I pray that she will minister to you all and minister to your hearts and to your families. We're doing this for the next 3 days to minister to our families of Revival Center and to all families, no matter what church you're from, that as we build up our families, our churches will be built up, and that we will have revival all over the land. It takes all of us working together, and I want us, before we begin and before we start, I hand it over to Sister Gabi. I want us all to kind of just get this in our minds already, that we're going to receive it. We're going to receive what she has for us. I know sometimes we can put barriers up, and I know if you don't know a speaker, you're just kind of like, oh, I'm kind of unsure. But I want you from the very beginning to open your heart, open your mind, open your spirit, and let's receive what God is trying to speak into us, what God is going to do in us for our families. So tonight, be encouraged, and I'm excited to have Sister Gabi Reyes here with us. Hello, Sister Gabi. We have you now on screen with us. We're happy to have you here joining us, and we just want you to take your liberty, speak whatever you're feeling and everything. Don't forget, also, everyone, as Sister Gabi is speaking, you can write down any questions that you have in the YouTube chat box. But also, we have as well a number for you to text any of your questions to, and that is going to be displayed right now. Sorry, you guys. It's going to be displayed there for you. And so that way you can see that and be able to use that number. I want to encourage you, if you have any questions at all, and maybe you're kind of unsure about it, you can use that at the bottom. It should be able to come up there. Sorry for everyone. It should be just fine for you all. So make sure that you are using that number if you're kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should, or what question to put. Yeah. And so use that. And without further ado, Sister Gabi, I want to leave this open for you, and take your liberty tonight and go for it.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much to Revival Center. I give honor to Pastor Johnson and his family. I give honor to Pastor Josh and Sister Jeanette Aguilera. They are awesome, awesome youth pastors, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys for the next couple days. They had this amazing idea to do a digital family seminar, digital family conference, so that we can talk about some of the things that a lot of times we don't get the opportunity to talk about, namely mental health and how it affects our families in the church. In this day and age, I'm sure many of you guys know that depression, anxiety is on the rise, especially with a lot of our young people. And sometimes we can shift the focus or shift the blame onto the young people. But really, we all live together, right? We live in church together, community together, in society together. So a lot of what our young people do is influenced by the environment that's around them. And so tonight, the topic is going to be parental wounds, and we're going to really talk about, some of the things that maybe we don't get a chance to talk about, namely some of the stuff that we carry with us day to day. So this is going to be focused more on the parents for tonight, but we're going to also incorporate other things that will probably be relevant to young people. But the reason why I'm starting with parental wounds is because a lot of times, like I mentioned, we carry intergenerational trauma with us, right? From childhood, from things that happened to us in childhood to young adulthood, we meet somebody, we get married, have children, and sometimes we think that when we come to Christ, that a lot of those things are automatically gone. And yes, when we come to Christ, we are saved, we are renewed, we are new creatures. And sometimes we need to learn new behaviors, right? We need to overcome some of the trauma that has been, for whatever reason, maybe not spoken about, maybe pushed under the rug. For a lot of us, it might not be normal to talk about feelings, to share our thoughts, in our family system. Maybe that was discouraged. And so when parents have children, they bring some of those same kind of patterns of communication or lack of communication in with their children, and then the cycle continues. So the focus for today is to kind of take note of the parental wounds, right? That we can carry. And it might sound more depressing than it actually is. The good news is, because we are new creatures in Christ, he can and does cut off generational curses. He gives us the opportunity to live a new life, to live a life of hope where there was hopelessness or helplessness. So we're gonna focus on some topics tonight that is mainly, like I mentioned, starting off the seminar with parental wounds, and we're going to take a look at what some of those wounds can be. So I want to start off really quickly with the scripture in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, a very well-known scripture. It says, "Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." And the devil hates united families. He hates strong communities. He hates when these generational curses are broken. And so we have the opportunity to really dive in and explore some of these curses, right? Or some of these wounds that may have been inflicted upon us, and then explore different ways that we can address them. So as Pastor Josh mentioned, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work with the County of Santa Clara. I have worked with them for a number of years, working specifically right now with the population of opiate addiction, so drug addiction. But I've also worked in the jails. I've worked with children and families in the foster and juvenile justice system. I also have my part-time private practice now, where I see kids, youth, adolescents, couples, and families. And I have, the secular kind of schooling, but I also thought there was a need, right, to have faith-based counseling. So that's kind of my background and where I'm coming from. And again, I thank you guys for the opportunity to be with you guys tonight. Okay, so we are going to talk a bit about trauma tonight. Okay, so we're going to explore a little bit about that and what trauma can do to each of us, how it can impact our being with ourselves, our relationship with ourselves, first of all, our relationship with God, how we think God sees us. If we grew up in households that were very judgmental, very harsh, where there was a lot of abuse, sometimes we view God as that. We view God as, a very harsh, critical, judgmental God, and then we internalize some of those feelings as well. So we want to explore the impact that trauma can play on each and every person. And then we will look at different topics, like I said, that can stem from trauma. Okay. So what is trauma? Trauma is an experience that overwhelms you, right? A reaction to an event that might make you collapse. It might make you want to forget. It might make you want to push away certain people, certain memories, certain things because they're too painful to bring about. It's an awful, awful thing. It can be, if we look from a childhood standpoint, it could be physical abuse, it could be emotional abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse. But it can also be just an incident or a series of incidents that our body and mind was just not able to cope with. And so we want to look at what some of those things are. So I want to start with a topic, and we're going to explore more about trauma in later slides, but I want to start with codependency, right? So some of us may have heard that term before. Some of us, it might be the first time we're hearing it. And basically, codependency is putting more focus on other people than ourselves. And this is not compassion. That's different. Compassion or empathy. Codependency is losing yourself because you're putting everyone else first, and you think that is what you need to do. So, for example, in our family traditions, sometimes our mothers could play that role of codependency, right? They can give to their families, to their children, because they were taught to be selfless all the time. And while we are called to help others, and while we are called to serve others, right, it's biblical, there is something wrong when we lose ourselves in the process, when we deny our own needs, not our wants, but our needs, so that somebody else can be okay. And we're going to look at what that is, right? So codependency, like I mentioned, not focusing on your own life, but overly focusing on other people's lives. So for parents, that could be only focusing on their children, maybe losing their identity, not knowing who they are, because all of their time and attention is spent on the kids. And again, there is value in parents pouring into their children. I am not saying anything otherwise. The problem lies when we don't balance that out, and again, when we lose ourselves, when we don't even know who we are anymore, because we are putting others before ourselves. So we can be codependent in one relationship or in several. We can be codependent in our work and even in our ministry. Some of the examples might be being unable to say no, overworking ourselves just because we want the approval of other people, but at the same time we are neglecting ourselves, our health, our emotional health. We may be confused on how to love, how to let go, how to say no, and how to separate while being connected. So there is a place and there is a value in, like I mentioned, being compassionate, having empathy, for parents pouring into their children, having time with them, getting to know them really. But the issue lies when, again, we forget who we are, and we think that it is noble to lose ourselves in the process. So God does not want us to do that, and this, like I said, can stem from our family system. So again, they take better care of other people than themselves. They obsess over the other person, whether it's their spouse, their kid, somebody else, by thinking about them, feeling anxious, and constantly checking up on them. And they know more about other people's feelings and other people's thoughts and likes versus their own. They may feel guilty and responsible if they are not 24/7 doing the thing that they, have kind of obsessed about. We can look at it as kind of an obsession, and they may feel stuck and victimized. They may try to fix and control people, places, and things. Give me just a moment, everyone. I thought I shared my screen, but Looks like I did not. I apologize. I apologize for that. Okay. I hope that worked.
Yes.
It did? Okay. Thank you, Brother Josh. Sorry about that. So I had gone over a couple slides. I will send them to Brother Josh and Sister Jeanette if you guys want to review them afterwards. But we just went through a couple slides kind of explaining codependency and some characteristics about them. Okay. Codependency, people pleasing. Sometimes we might even enable other people. We might lie or cover up other people's mistakes because we fear the rejection. So at the core of it, it's people pleasing, it's neglecting ourselves. They know what everybody else should do except themselves. They can fix everybody else except themselves. And there lies a problem that we have the opportunity to explore. Okay. So some of the characteristics we kind of went over together. Working too much without asking for help, right? Having trouble delegating or asking for just additional assistance. We can, sometimes this can happen with moms in particular. You know, they like things a certain way. They know how things are done. You know, they cannot trust anybody else. They cannot trust their teenager to do it. Why? Because they're not going to do as great of a job as them. But what happens? They work themselves into the ground. They become resentful, bitter, stressed out, all because we don't have those boundaries, right? We don't have that. We don't listen to the internal need, which is to balance things out. And you know, with codependency, we can feel inadequate no matter how good of a job we might be doing, because we are so dependent on other people's praise. We're so dependent on people pleasing. Another characteristic of codependency is feeling responsible for other people's moods and problems. Again, this can stem from our childhood. Maybe in childhood we were constantly needing and desiring approval from our parents, and maybe because they were busy, maybe because they were in their own, dealing with their own struggles, with their own addiction, maybe they hadn't come to Christ and didn't know how to be a supportive, positive presence. They couldn't give us that validation. So now as adults, we're constantly doing everything we can to make people like us, to make people accept us. But the problem lies when we neglect ourselves in the process. Okay, so on this slide, I have a quiz to allow you guys to see and explore if you have any codependency tendencies. There's a range, it's a spectrum from mildly codependent to extremely codependent. All of us have the desire to be a supportive presence, you know, with our families, in the church. But again, the problem arises when we neglect ourselves in the process. So I am going to give this presentation to Brother Josh and Sister Jeanette, and they will be able to share this with anyone who would like. But here's a quiz to allow you to explore if any of this rings true for you. Okay, back to trauma. So trauma is an experience that overwhelms you. It causes a reaction that makes you collapse or forget or push away. Why does this happen? It's too hard to go back to that place of trauma. It's so hard to go back that the body actually believes, and the brain, that it's happening right now. And this could be witnessing violence in our homes, in the community. It could be being in a terrible car accident where maybe we were very seriously injured or somebody else was. It can also be constant criticism, right? Constant just putting down by our caregivers growing up. And so what happens is when we become adults, there's that part in our brain, the right side of our brain, which we'll go into in a little bit, that believes that the trauma is still happening, even if Even if the accident happened years ago, even if the trauma, the abuse happened years ago, certain triggers, certain cues will make us believe that it's happening again to us right here and right now. And that is the power, if we can call it that, the power of trauma. That even if we are removed from the thing that originally traumatized us, our brain and our body believes that it's still happening. So we can feel helpless when this occurs. We live the experience once again. We feel like it's happening and we feel stuck. Trauma is not a memory, it's something that's lived. It's something that sits inside of our mind and our body. And until we pay attention to it, until we ask God, to give us the tools that we need to heal and replace those behaviors, replace the maladaptive behaviors with new ways of coping and behaving, it's going to come up in situations that we don't even want it to come up. Okay, so as we mentioned, trauma sits on the right side of the brain. So we have an image here of the left side of the brain in blue, the right side of the brain, which is highlighted in pink. And here we see all the functions that take place in our brain. Our left side of the brain, we can say, is our reasoning part, right? The decisions, thinking through things, facts, and analyzing things comes through the left side of the brain, and the right side is a very, we could look at it as a sort of artsy, feely type component to our brain. So creativity lives there, intuition, arts, creation, feeling, and imagination. And so what happens is when trauma occurs, which is on the feeling side, the right side of our brain, the left side of our brain doesn't catch up to that. The left side of our brain doesn't realize that we are no longer being traumatized because the feelings are so strong. The feeling of fearing abandonment, the feeling of, being abused one more time in a relationship. All those feelings can come up for us when we don't deal with trauma. Okay, so inherited trauma. These are things, something I came across and I wanted to put in here. Things we inherit from our family. We all know looks. We all know sometimes humor, right? Even handedness, left hand, right hand. We can inherit that from our family members. But intergenerational trauma, that is also something that we inherit from our family. And I say all this not to paint a hopeless picture, but to say that there's hope, when we, of course, bring this to God, of course, pray about this, put ourselves in God's hands, especially when we come to Christ initially. And there are also things that we can learn. God has given us the ability to think and reason. He has put different people on this earth to help us out with different things. And so just like we would go to a medical doctor for a physical condition, we can also seek psychological or emotional, mental health for our brain, for our emotions, for behaviors that aren't helpful to us. There's no shame in that. We all can benefit from getting new tools, new resources. Okay. So the body acts as if there's a present danger when trauma occurs. We can carry wounds that we first came across as children, then to adulthood, marriage, and then to parenting. And depending on our family tradition, we may have been conditioned to not speak about these things, to not express our thoughts and our feelings. Okay, let me go on to the next slide. So we're going to begin to speak a bit about attachment, but before that, I want to just say people experience trauma differently. Traumatized people look at the world in a fundamentally different way than people who have not been traumatized. For example, somebody who didn't have a parent growing up, right? Somebody who, some people call it, having daddy issues. I don't like that term, but I'm using it so that you guys can kind of understand what I'm talking about. If we have not had a present caregiver, or even if they've been in the home but haven't been emotionally present with us, we are going to grow up with that need of constantly needing approval, constantly needing affection. Why? Because growing up, we didn't get that from our caregivers. And so we're going to approach every relationship in that way, fearing abandonment, fearing that we are not good enough. So that's kind of the core belief that we've decided about ourselves, that because we weren't good enough, because we didn't do XYZ, we are unworthy of love, unworthy of full acceptance. And of course, God is the only one who can give us unconditional love. It's very unfair to put that onto our spouses or onto our children to give us unconditional love. But there is such a thing as being seen and being heard and being known on this earth. And God wants us to have healthy relationships. So when we're able to identify some of the things that hurt us in our past, but not just stay there. I'm not saying that, we should say, woe is me, or make excuses for ourselves because of our past. But when we're able to acknowledge some of the traumatic things we've gone through, some of the things, that were hurtful to us, and then move on from that, we have just broken the generational curse, right? We have just cut off what the devil doesn't want us to cut off, to find freedom, to find liberty in this life. Okay, so traumatized people look at the world in a fundamentally different way. So for example, if you see a grumpy person, right, at the grocery store, and this grumpy person is cranky, to most people, but to a survivor of trauma, that man might be a threat. That man might be ready and willing to harm us. So somebody who hasn't gone through trauma might just say, okay, that grumpy man is just having a bad day, not a threat. But somebody who's gone through trauma, they might see that as a cue, that they might see that as a trigger that something bad is going to go down in the grocery store. Another example could be if, for example, our kids say that they need a little bit of space, right? A little bit of alone time, just because they need to process the day's events. A parent might view that as a personal rejection, right? That they're not good enough, that they didn't do something to, that they didn't do more, right, to earn the love of their child. And the kid might just be like, I just need a couple minutes to cool down. So what happens is, if we've had traumatic experiences, if we've had abandonment, if we've had abuse, if we've had harsh criticism in our history, we will approach things in that way, that things are a threat, that people are threats. And again, everyone experiences trauma differently. Some people experience instant healing when they come to Christ. Some of these things don't come up ever again. But for others, it can be a process. The healing can be a process, and new tools have to be learned and gained in order to access healing. Okay, so we're going to talk briefly about attachment. I want to be mindful and respectful of the time that we have, and we're going to explore 4 different attachment styles. Some of you may or may not have heard the different attachment styles, but we're going to go over them briefly. So the first one is a secure attachment style, and it's in the top left corner of our little square here. A secure attachment is developed when kids regularly get their needs met. They feel comfortable around their parents. They have a clear understanding of their identity. They feel safe. They feel nurtured and in touch with their parents. In adulthood, somebody with a secure attachment feels comfortable with their emotions and relationships. They know how to draw boundaries. They know how to express their emotions in a healthy manner, and they feel secure and connected to their partners. They also are not afraid to leave. This is very important. They're not afraid to leave an unhealthy relationship because they recognize and understand that it's harmful to them. They're also capable of handling rejection because they know it's not the end of the world if it happens. Overall, individuals with a secure attachment form trusting and long-lasting relationships. So that's the first attachment style. The second attachment style is what we call an anxious attachment style. So an anxious attachment is developed when the child receives inconsistent messages about love and care from their caregivers. The child is oftentimes left feeling empty and confused. I'm sorry, let me go on to the next slide. Okay, so we went over secure attachment and some of the characteristics of that. So secure attachment leads to resiliency, feeling confident, non-reactive, having a reciprocal relationship with others, not shying away from criticism or conflict. And then we went to the anxious attachment, right? So anxious attachment happens when we get an inconsistent amount of love and care. So the child is left feeling confused and empty. In adulthood, somebody with an anxious attachment style feels nervous and insecure about their relationships. These individuals need constant reassurance and communication to feel peace within themselves. Because they didn't get that growing up, they then rely on other people to give them that security, to give them that a confidence. There's also a lack of trust from somebody who has an anxious attachment style. Why? Because they have a difficult time believing that they are loved, believing that somebody loves them. They want to feel secure, they want to feel safe, they want to have that loving bond with their partners, but they can oftentimes become clingy and possessive. Why? Because they are scared, they are afraid that they're not good enough, they're afraid that their partner doesn't love them enough. So individuals with an anxious attachment style tend to idealize their relationships, but they live at the same time, they live in constant fear of abandonment and rejection. Okay, the next style of attachment is the avoidant attachment style. So this style, the avoidant attachment style, is developed when only a portion of the child's needs are met. For example, they might be fed, right? They might get the kind of basic needs. They might have a roof over their head, but emotionally they are neglected by the caregiver. The parent might discourage the child from crying or have little to no response when the child is hurting. The parent is indifferent to the child. And adults with an avoidant attachment style tend to distance themselves from emotional intimacy. So they might not have any close relationships, any close friendships, because they're indifferent. They tend to rationalize their emotions and deny their own feelings to avoid confrontation, because confrontation is anxiety producing, and somebody with an avoidant attachment style shies away from that. So overall, to kind of sum that up, somebody who has an avoidant attachment style may constantly keep their partner at arm's length, right? There's not that kind of emotional closeness, emotional intimacy, because they fear feeling vulnerable with another person. Why? Because growing up, anytime they tried to be vulnerable, there was not a present caregiver who could care for the emotional needs. Okay, the next one is the last attachment style we will look at is the fearful avoidant attachment style. A fearful attachment is developed when a child is neglected or abused in their household. Different types of abuse that we talked about: physical, emotional, sexual. Neglect. They have a difficult time connecting with others, but at the same time, they're craving intimacy. They want to remain independent, though, and they want to remain distant. Why? Because, again, in the past, when they were vulnerable, they were just beat down, they were criticized, they were abused. So people who have a fearful attachment style usually get into very dysfunctional and unstable relationships. This is different than the secure attachment that we looked at earlier. Remember, in the secure attachment style, people who are in an unhealthy relationship are able to recognize it and walk away and say, you know what, this is not good for me, this is toxic. Of course, before marriage, right? The moment that we choose somebody to marry, that becomes the one. That's the person that we chose. So, in marriage, we can't just walk away at every disagreement. Once we get to that place in marriage, God has ordained that so that we stay together. So I'm not using this as an out for the people who are already married. I'm talking about people who are not yet there and are young people who have not gotten to marriage. So adults with a fearful attachment style live in two conflicting worlds. They have the anxious attachment style. They have the avoidant attachment style. And overall, there's sort of this like push-pull, like, yes, I want, closeness with my children or my spouse, but at the same time, there's this distance as well. Why? Because we have been abused in our past, and so we may not even know how to have closeness, how to have emotional intimacy with other people in the context of the family. So we may want to feel close and loved, but we will avoid any feelings of intimacy at the same time. Okay. So those are the 4 attachment styles that we looked at. Back to trauma, right? The possible effects of trauma. For some children, we can think, oh, it's ADHD. They're so ADHD, especially boys. Boys are overdiagnosed with ADHD, and it could just be that they're hyper. It could just be that they're displaying age-appropriate behaviors of, just having a lot of energy, needing some kind of structure, needing some kind of organization of their day. But what happens, a lot of times we peg especially boys as being ADHD, when in reality it can be their lack of concentration, their lack of focusing, their lack of ability to sit still can actually be an effect of trauma. But a lot of times, like I say, we are quick to say, oh, they're just a rowdy kid, they're just a disobedient kid, they don't respect their elders. That may or may not be true, but again, the effects of trauma are real, and until we begin to address them, we will just, we will not move past that. So we can actually feel physical pain when we've experienced something traumatic. For kiddos, right, if they are anxious, a lot of times they might experience stomach aches, right? So you might hear, oh, Mom, Dad, I don't want to go to school today because I have a stomach ache. Of course, now we're in the COVID pandemic. Nobody's going anywhere. But before, pre-pandemic, kids who might say they have a stomach ache, they might actually be anxious, but don't know how to express that. So trauma or mental health issues can show up in the body in different ways. For other of us, we can have a lot of tightness maybe in our shoulders, so we walk around like this because we just are really anxious and don't know how to relax. So if we're able to notice different things happening in our body, we can say, okay, body, you're tensing up again, relax your shoulders, or take a deep breath, right? Because our breath can be very shallow when we are scared or when we feel threatened. And so when we're able to, like I mentioned, tap into what's going on, not only in our mind and our thoughts, but in our body as well, we are able to stop, whatever thing is trying to take away our focus. So again, we can have disorganized thoughts, we can have lack of memory, with trauma, we can have real problems relating to other people. Some people are really comfortable with with small talk. They can walk into any room and chat it up with everybody and anybody. But somebody who has gone through trauma, somebody who's gone through constant rejection, maybe been bullied at school, abused by parents, they will walk into the same room, or they might not even be able to walk into the room. They might be in the corner, they might just be really scared, and other people might take them as weird, or strange, but in reality, something contributed to them acting that way. And that is why there's value in recognizing some of the signs of trauma and what we can do about it. It's not all, depressing. There are definitely things that we can do, to move past this, but recognizing trauma is an important first step. Substance use and abuse can also be a result of trauma. So I work with, like I mentioned earlier, I work with people who have opioid dependence, so people who are, addicted to heroin or oxys or benzodiazepines or, all of these sedatives. And people will say, I use this because I can't deal with my thoughts of trauma. They're too much. I don't know how to cope other than putting a substance into my body. And sure, some of us or some in the church may not deal with substance use, but it could be that they know a family member who's going through substance use, or we know people who are at risk of developing substance use. So that is why there is also value in exploring some of these things. Okay, so let's go now to how a caregiver's trauma can impact a child's development. So even in the womb, right, the mother releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone. The baby can absorb that through the placenta. But again, just because one feels stressed doesn't mean that we're going to ruin our children. Everybody experiences a range of emotions, and every emotion is normal. It's what we allow the emotion to do and how much control we allow it to have over us that is going to make the difference. So a caregiver may struggle to regulate their own emotions, right? And that can impact the development of their baby. That can impact the relationship that they have with their baby, and the baby can learn, again, like we talked about, my parents cannot meet my needs, so maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I didn't do enough, to keep my parents together. Maybe I didn't do enough, to make my mom love me. And all of these things are things that, again, may have been passed down because it's possible that our mothers had trauma in their past that they weren't even aware of. So in adulthood, a person who has had a caregiver with untreated trauma, they might be more likely to develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. They might be more likely to struggle to repair conflict. They might struggle with their relationships. They might unintentionally bring out negative behaviors in others, be emotionally detached. And again, that cycle might continue. So we are here today not to present a very negative picture on things, but to, explore some of the reasons why we behave the way that we behave, why we think the way that we do, and to inject hope that, when we come to Christ, He can and does erase any generational curse that has been, set in stone before us. Anything our ancestors, our great-grandparents, and so forth, so on and so forth, did, any pacts with the enemy, pacts with the devil that may have been done, before we even came into this world, they are canceled out when we come to Christ. Why? Because we give and we surrender our past, we surrender everything to Jesus, and so He gives us new life when we come to Christ. At the same time, like I mentioned earlier, we can and should learn new ways of relating, new ways of seeing ourselves through God's eye, first of all, and learning new ways to cope. Okay, so we can break this cycle of trauma. Let me go on. Okay. I want to be respectful of time. We have just a few more slides, but I do want to go into this one, perfectionism, right? So this is a kind of all or nothing thinking. If it's not perfect, then it's not good enough. Or at least that's what we think. That's how we feel. And this all or nothing thinking is thinking in two extremes. So we can either be a success or a failure if we have this perfectionistic all or nothing thinking, but nothing in between. Your performance was either good, or all bad. And if we are not perfect, we can feel that we are a failure. For each person, perfectionism looks differently. Perfectionism looks differently, and it's a very binary way of thinking about things, right? It's, again, an all or nothing way of thinking. And what happens is, yes, it's good to strive for the best that we can achieve. Yes, it's good to put in all of our efforts, to do our best, to try our best. That is not the problem. The problem is that if we don't achieve a certain level, if our life doesn't look like the way we imagine it to, then we think that we are a failure. So I was reviewing some research that said that learning to challenge this distortion, learning to challenge perfectionism, helped in this study, helped children who are at risk of becoming depressed to avoid developing depression. Why? Because it's not an all or nothing thing. Of course, certain things are. Salvation is either we're saved or we're not. Either well, that's one thing, that's yes or no. But in terms of ourselves, our identity, the way that we relate with others, there's no such thing as quote unquote perfect. And so we really beat ourselves up. We do ourselves a disservice when we feel like we're a failure, if things don't come out perfect. So perfectionism tip, with perfectionism, it's best to just get the job done. Just get the job done, because what can happen is, especially for people who struggle with anxiety, that if the task is too big to think about, we can start to procrastinate. Why? Because we want to do a perfect job, but we know all the emotional energy it takes, all the stress that comes with being quote unquote perfect. So this applies to students. This can apply to anyone, but I'm thinking of students in this example, right? They might want that A+. Why? Because their parents say only A's are acceptable in this house. You can get nothing else other than an A, only 4.0. And while that is great if you're able to achieve that, I am not trying to knock that at all. The problem arises when we feel like if we get an A- or a B+, that we are a failure, especially if we've tried everything that we could to create a good work product. So if we start to feel anxious about meeting this unreasonable expectation of perfectionism, what happens is we'll procrastinate. So then our workload gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So then our anxiety grows, and then we can push others away and we can push ourselves away, because perfectionism really causes us to feel lonely. Why? Because just like in the example that I gave with the mothers earlier, if we have that perfectionist tendency, we think nobody else can do things the way that we can do things, right? We believe that it's better if we just do it ourselves, and that can lead to codependency. That can leave us just feeling stressed out and exhausted, because yes, we might do a quote unquote perfect job one time, but that is very difficult, if not impossible, to sustain. So then we start thinking very negatively about ourselves unless we reach that quote unquote perfect level. So we should ask ourselves, what do I get from this? What do I get from trying to be perfect, from trying to be a perfect mother, a perfect wife, a perfect spouse, a perfect student? What do I get from this? I'm actually anxious. I'm actually exhausted. What about if I did 5% less, but turned in the job, whatever it was? I did the dishes, wasn't perfect, but I did the dishes. I turned in that research paper. It wasn't perfect, but I turned it in. I did it. What if we do that, then consume ourselves with thoughts of perfectionism that are unreasonable? The only perfect being in this world is God. And, once we get to heaven, our bodies and minds will be transformed. But while we are on this earth, we are human beings that are not perfect. So from the beginning, it's an unreasonable thing to try to attain. Yes, we can, like I said, do our best and put everything into whatever we do. But to have this kind of ongoing narrative that we have to be perfect is very, very disruptive. Perfectionism, the benefit does not outweigh the cost. Why? Because again, we become more stressed, exhausted, unhappy, and resentful. Perfectionism can affect parents' relationships with their spouses, and can also affect their relationships with their children, which can affect the entire family system. And so this has stemmed from somewhere, right? It could be just wanting approval from others. It could be, comparison as well. Comparison is a thief of joy. Maybe we see Betty Susie at this stage of her life. Maybe she's a similar age, maybe similar background, and because Betty Susie is in this place, we want to be there too. But progress is not linear, meaning a straight line. It can look like this. But as long as we are moving, as long as we're attempting something, as long as we're trying, that makes all the difference. So some tips that we kind of looked at and explored, that we may not have time to go over all of them, but one of them sounds very simple, but it's really just to breathe. Of course, we want to pray, we want to seek God's face, we want to do everything that we can spiritually, so God can give us a wisdom and understanding that we need to move on and to find the root of the problem with our family relationships. But there are also things we can do to help our body and our mind to calm down. So one sounds very simple, but breathe. What happens is when we get anxious, when we get nervous, when we get overwhelmed and stressed, a lot of our breathing stays up here in the chest area. So what we recommend is practicing breathing exercises. People who sing or people who, play musical instruments, they will have heard that you want to breathe from the belly area, right? You want to take breaths from the diaphragm. Why? Because it's different to breathe from down here versus up here. When we are stressed and anxious, our brain does not get the level of oxygen it needs in order to think properly, in order to make rational decisions. So when we take a moment and say, okay, wait, I just need to take a few deep breaths right now. I just need to pause, maybe go to the bathroom for 5 minutes, away from the kids, away from the spouse, or just away from the noise of life. I'm just going to breathe. Okay, so here on the screen, you have a breathing exercise where you breathe in, and I would encourage you to place your hand on your tummy or on the sides of your tummy so you can feel your stomach inflating and deflating. There's something calming in that when we can get the right amount of oxygen to our brain. For some people, it's helpful to pretend they're breathing in through a straw. Why? Because it slows the breathing down. It slows the process down. And when we're able to slow ourselves down, our body and our mind are going to connect with each other, right? Just like we talked about earlier, that the left side of the brain is not reasoning when the right side of the brain, the creative, artsy, feely type of the brain, is feeling like all these emotions. The left side doesn't quite get that message that there's no danger right now. But by breathing, by taking intentional breaths to slow down, we are telling our brain, okay, we're going to be all right. We're going to get through this moment. Okay. The next thing we want to do, and they don't have to be done in order. These are just different tips that we can do. to help us when we feel anxious, when we feel triggered, when we feel overwhelmed and stressed. Again, I want to emphasize this is in addition to prayer, in addition to, spiritual things that we can do. So when we think about like perfectionism, when we think about, does this person love me, or does, am I enough? And if we start to think like, no, I'm a horrible person, I'm never going to get better. I do the thing that I don't want to do. I keep doing it every day. I'm just never going to get better. So this is when we want to notice. We want to take a deep breath. We want to notice and think, how is this helping me? How is this negative, self-defeating self-talk helping me? And if it's not helping, if there's a disconnect between what's beneficial to us and what is hurting us, that might be a moment to start thinking about change. Because what happens is, especially for people who, who are just very busy, running from one thing to the next, we can do these things mindlessly. People who are in ministry, there's, Tuesday night there's this, Wednesday night that activity, Thursday night, Bible study. So we can have something lined up every single day, and we can get lost in the busyness that we don't take a moment to just notice what's happening, notice what we're thinking, what we're feeling, notice the impact of their relationships with others, especially our family members. So when we do everything on autopilot, there's no opportunity to really, like I said, notice what's happening, and then create an opportunity to be aware of what's happening in the moment. I know in AA they talk about this, right? Or some of you may have heard, like the first thing that you want to do is in addiction is acknowledge that you're an alcoholic, right? You may have heard that, like that's 50% of the battle. I don't know if it's 50% of the battle, but there's definitely value in recognizing what we're doing, what we're thinking. Is this helpful to me? And if it's not helpful, there's an opportunity to create change. Okay. The next tip that we have is just to admit, okay, I messed up, admitting to small mistakes. And there was something I was reading about, another research piece, that when we admit our small mistakes and laugh about them and share them with others, even our children, it actually relaxes us, because we don't have that need to be perfect, which is, again, unreal. We can relax, and if we're relaxed, other people in our lives can relax too. Our children, don't have to be on edge all the time. Our spouses don't have to be on edge all the time, because they're not waiting for our next criticism. So when we admit, okay, I didn't do this exactly how I wanted to, for example, if you're cooking, your favorite recipe, or you're cooking something that is going to take a lot of time and dedication, and if you accidentally, I've done this before, if you accidentally put garlic instead of oatmeal into your oatmeal, it's like, okay, I messed that up. I'm not gonna lose sleep about it. I'll just make a new batch of oatmeal, or I can try to eat it with the garlic, but that would be strange. So you don't have to pretend that you are this perfect person who never makes mistakes. Why? Because we're human, and we make mistakes, and so expressing them, talking about them, it's not going to make you weaker. It's actually going to show a human side of you that the people around you, your children, your spouse, or even friends, they're not going to be on edge all the time. So it's okay to admit to failure. You don't have to be that overbearing parent who thinks they're perfect, or says they're perfect, but in actuality, they know, like, okay, these are all the things I don't like about myself. I don't like this about me, but I have to keep up this facade with my children. Otherwise, they're going to think I'm weak. Otherwise, they won't listen to me. No, there are different ways that we can gain other people's trust, other people's respect. Okay, admit, continued. So if we are tyrants, if we're cold and have this attitude of I'm always right, I'm never wrong, it's really hard to live up to, and it's untrue. we have this a standard on our spouses, on our children, that's unattainable. And just like we talked about, breaking these generational curses, you know, we can break the generational curse of 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 perfectionism, of talking down to other people, of just feeling miserable. That is a curse. And, when we're miserable, when we're lonely and stressed, we've just pushed other people away, when really all of us, at the core, all of us really just want to be seen, loved, and accepted. So we, of course, have that in Christ. The only unconditional source of love on this earth is Christ. But other than that, who we marry is very important. And if we have made a mistake, or if we felt that the person that we chose wasn't God's choice, okay, it's not the end of the world. God can help us to, get through some very difficult times and very difficult situations. And there can still be something to reap, something good to come from that. And so, like I mentioned, the only source of unconditional love is Christ. It is unreasonable to think anybody on this earth can give us that. But at the core, we do have the desire to be seen, loved, and accepted. Okay, and this is our last slide. Thank you all for your time. These are ways that we can support coping and healing that involve the mind as well as the body. So we talked about some of the thoughts that we can change, into breaking these generational curses of trauma. But there's also value in involving our body, involving creativity to connect. So, for example, we have, connecting with our creativity and imagination. That's actually, you might think, oh, that's just for kids. But no, there's value in adults doing this too. So painting with watercolors, cooking or baking, trying a different recipe, coloring. There's a lot. Coloring books are really popular now for adults. The reason why they're popular is because they help calm us down. They help, take away the pressure of just thinking, go all day long. There's also value in connecting with nature, the nature that God has created for all of us to enjoy. Watching the clouds, picking flowers, going for a drive and enjoying nature. There's also value in connecting with yourself and your emotions. Writing in a journal. I cannot overemphasize writing, because just by writing down your thoughts, if you feel anxious, stressed, nervous, depressed, scared, you have now taken all that pressure from your mind and you have placed it somewhere else where you're not the only one who has to carry this. So even if you want to delete it, like if you're writing in your phone, right, you're tapping notes on your phone, writing your feelings down there, even if you want to delete it after that so nobody sees it, you can do that. But the idea is to take the thoughts that are overwhelming you in your mind and writing them down, and just that practice is naturally calming. It allows you to notice what you're feeling, and you just feel better after that. Okay, connecting with others, connecting with your senses, and connecting with your body. These are all things that we can do, tangible things that we can do to help us, with some of the things that we've talked about. And of course, the last thing is to believe. Believe that the cycle of abuse, believe that the cycle of pain, of trauma, right, of, even if you haven't gone through abuse or pain or trauma, that cycles of intergenerational trauma, believe that they stop with you. Believe that they don't have to go on any longer. Believe that God wants us to live free of pain and hurt, and He wants to give us new ways to cope, because we are new creatures in Christ and He loves us. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our presentation. Let me, I don't know, Brother Josh.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That was fantastic. That was amazing, Sister Gabby. I was just like sitting there, just blown away by what I'm hearing, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I know we've been seeing the comments. A lot of people have been saying thank you so much. It's they've been really getting so much out of this. Um, so thank you so much, Sister Gabby, for doing this for us. Incredible amount of just incredible, insightful information for all of us, and to deal with the traumas in our lives. We do actually have some questions for you, Sister Gabby. So, one of the questions was, how can we help a person who is having a meltdown or some sort of mental breakdown, like anger, fear, maybe they're on edge, or maybe they're having an anxiety attack? What are what can we do for someone who's going through something like that?
Okay. So I think you mentioned, Brother Josh, meltdown,
Yeah,
anxiety attack.
yeah. Fear,
Okay.
anger, maybe they're just on edge, kind of thing.
They're on edge.
Yeah,
Okay. Um, a couple things. So it kind of depends because those are a little bit different, right? If somebody's having an anxiety attack, or if somebody is, really stressed out, those are kind of two different things. But if they are, having an anxiety attack, one of the things that can be helpful is to just tell them, okay, let's breathe. We're going to breathe together. Okay. So having them look at you in the eyes and just letting them know we're going to do this together. We're going to breathe together. That it removes the judgment, that removes the condemnation that that person has on themselves, because they don't want to have an anxiety attack. They don't want to have a meltdown in front of other people. I'm sure they would much rather deal with this on their own, but something triggered them in that moment, um, to have their anxiety go up to the levels that it did. So, like I said, have make eye contact with them. Let them know it's okay. We're gonna be okay. When you say we, it's sort of like we're gonna get through this together. It doesn't just put the onus of getting better on that person. It's like you are presenting yourself as a helper. So if you say, it's okay, look at me, we're going to take a couple deep breaths together. Okay, I want you to put your hand on your tummy, and I'm going to put my hand on my tummy. And we're going to pretend our stomach is a balloon. We're going to inflate it, have it go out, and then let it deflate. It sounds very simple, but a lot of times what happens is with anxiety attacks or meltdowns, the person believes that something terrible is going to happen, and they're not going to be able to get through the next 5, 10, 30 minutes. So just by doing that activity alone, it helps the person to think, okay, I'm going to be okay. I'm not alone. We're going to get through this. Yes, we're going to get through this together. This person's not judging me. Even if you think like, why is this person having a meltdown? Like, there's nothing in this room to have triggered them. Don't bring that judgment on, and that now is not the time to do that. Now is the time, like I mentioned, to just help them, let them know that you're there, and together take a series of deep breaths. So I would say, let's count in for 5, let's count out for 7 or 10. We want to breathe out longer than we breathe in. Why? Because that's sort of allowing the mind and the body to reset. So I would say that would be a good first step. But a couple other things are, do they feel that they're in danger? So maybe they're having this hyperventilating action because they're in a dangerous part of town, or they heard somebody threaten them and they don't feel safe. So we definitely want to assess for safety. Assess like if they're in harm's way at this moment, and if they are, we want to call the police, we want to call the authorities. If they are a risk to themselves, if they're, threatening to harm themselves in that moment, we want to remove the method. If it's, a razor, if it's a gun, if it's a knife, whatever it is that's going to harm them, we want to remove that. Again, let them know that they're okay, that you are there to help them. But really just provide a positive presence. It sounds very simple, but there is power in letting somebody know, I'm here, we're going to get through this together. No judgment. I'm here to help. You know, another thing that can be helpful is just asking the person, what do you need in this moment? And they might not know. Or some people, they might need a hug. They might need a hug to help calm them down. And if it's appropriate, if it's a girl to girl thing, or guy to guy, or if you're of an opposite gender, maybe getting somebody else involved who is in the same gender. And yeah, if all they need is a hug to help calm them down, then we want to give that to them.
Yeah, that's very good. Awesome. Okay, those are some quick, easy little strategies for us, and I know that those will greatly help. This next question is kind of a big question, kind of like a loaded question here, so much in it. You can kind of summarize it however way you want to do it, Sister Gabby, but here it is. How do you deal with childhood drama, or trauma, sorry, childhood trauma that stemmed from church? Yeah.
Um, yeah, that is a loaded question. Well, first off, I want to say yes, it has happened to people. Just because somebody goes to church doesn't mean that they don't have these thoughts and desires and impulses, that need attention to. So I don't want to say that, I don't want to, to say that every person that goes to church is like quote unquote saved and has the right mentality going to church. So I would say, there is definitely value in talking to, a Christian therapist about this. If this person is still going to the church and other people might be in danger, letting the pastor know, because we don't want other people to fall victim to that. A lot of times people will say, "Oh, I won't believe that the trauma or the abuse happened unless it's proven." Very few instances will a child make up that they are being abused or traumatized. So I will say that, of course, we want to approach this with godly wisdom, involve the pastor, allow healing for that person by, like I said, seeking their own help. Also assessing the risk. Does the predator still, I will call him predator, does the sexual predator still attend the church? And if and are other people being exposed to that person? If the answer is yes, then that is why engaging the pastor is a very wise thing to do, because then we can come up with different options to remedy the situation. I hope that helps.
That's good. That's
I
good.
do want to say
Yeah.
every case is different,
Yeah.
so it's hard to give a blanket answer to that.
Okay. So if there's anyone that actually has any specific questions, kind of thing, they could message us at that number. That's there. There we go. There. So also, there is one more or two more questions here, sister. If this one, I'll just read it to you, and you can figure out how you want to talk about it. If you are an introvert in personality and you experience an extreme traumatic childhood, how do you help them express their feelings and not hold on to that traumatic pain?
I'm not sure I understood.
So, an introvert that's experienced extreme trauma in their childhood, how would you help them express those feelings and not hold on to that traumatic pain?
Okay. So I think by introvert they mean that they are more on the quiet side.
Yeah, more on the quiet side, yeah.
Quiet side, and maybe are scared to share their thoughts and feelings. They can definitely be expressed, but the introvert needs to feel safe in order to even consider being vulnerable with somebody else. So um, if we look at like the classic definition of an introvert, it's not necessarily that they're quiet, it's that they um, get more stimulation by being alone, versus an extrovert that needs external stimulation from other people. If we're looking at it as sort of a binary thing, although it's much more fluid than that. But for the purposes of this question, we are going to say that the introvert is maybe quieter, this person is quieter, and maybe doesn't feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and feelings. So, and it depends. The nature of the relationship depends. So if the introvert is a child and the mom or parent is not that, it might be hard for the parent to understand why the child feels the way that they do, and they might have certain expectations on the youth of like, why don't just say it, just blurt it out, what's the problem? That's not going to create trust. It's not going to create safety to kind of poke at someone just because they don't feel comfortable yet to share their feelings. Another thing, so I would say one thing that could be helpful is just kind of starting from zero. So for example, in therapy, when we get people who aren't comfortable talking, we won't right away say, tell me your deepest, darkest secrets, because if they're not ready to do that, yeah, they're not ready to do that. So we might start with lighter topics. So for example, if it's a parent wanting their child to confide in them, they could play a game, playing Uno. It sounds very simple, but that helps people to really calm down and feel comfortable. And the more safety we can have, the more trust that can grow with that, So we really want to approach this by not by tell me what you're feeling, but more of like, how can I create safety? How can I create trust, with this introvert, with this quiet person, so that we can get to that point eventually, you know. So I would encourage this person not to lose patience, not to lose hope right away, to be patient, because something contributed to this person being quiet and keeping their feelings on the inside. So they need to feel a level of safety, a level of comfort and trust before they can share their thoughts and feelings.
All
Hope
right,
that
thank you.
that
Yes, thank you
helps.
so much. That's very good, and I think that definitely helps uh, and answer that for someone that needs it. Um, one last question for you tonight, Sister Gabby. Okay, how did you mix up the garlic with the oatmeal? That's all the questions that is definitely on our minds. So I definitely want to hear this story, and I think we can all agree on that.
In my defense, Brother Josh, we shop at Costco a lot, and the spices are in the same kind of packaging, whether it's salt, onion powder, garlic, and cinnamon. What happened was it was dark one morning, and I just automatically went to where I thought the cinnamon usually went. Somebody in the house switched it for whatever reason, not on purpose, but the color kind of looked the same, the garlic powder and the cinnamon. And so, like I said, it was sort of an auto thing. I poured it in, I poured in my water, and and then the smell was, you know, wait a minute. That's
Oh man, I'm sure. Did you get a little bite of it, or did you
Yeah, I
already
didn't
know?
want to waste it. I didn't want to waste the oatmeal because I already made it. And then as I was eating it, I was like, oh no, I should have just thrown this out.
Oh man.
Science experiment.
Yeah.
Kids, don't try that at home. Do not have.
Well, we want to thank you, Sister Gabby, for this amazing beginning of our digital family seminar. We want to encourage everyone for tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. We're coming back here, here on our YouTube from Revival Center. Our topic that Sister Gabi Reyes will be returning for is parent-child relationships, from babies to teens. And then Saturday morning at 10:30 in the morning. 10:30 in the morning. So I want to make sure you all are clear on that. Not 10:30 at night. 10:30 in the morning. We're going to be talking about, our Sister Gabi is going to be talking about mental health issues in youth, the signs, the symptoms, and the addictions. So we want to say, Sister Gabi, thank you so much for doing this with us. Revival Center and all the churches that are here are deeply, deeply grateful for you doing this with us tonight and for this weekend. So,
Thank you for the invitation.
amen. Everyone, we'll see you all tomorrow night. God bless you guys. Have a great night. See you tomorrow at 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. All right. God bless you.
God bless you.